Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive into crypto. It feels like every week there's something new to talk about, but this week is, I don't know, it feels especially wild out there. It's December 17th, 2024, and we've got a whole stack of reports and articles to dig into, everything from Bitcoin still being on top to Ethereum making moves in traditional finance.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting mix for sure. We've got regulatory stuff happening, some unexpected partnerships, and of course, some pretty fascinating market movements to try to make sense of.
Well, let's jump right in with the topic that I'm sure is on everyone's mind, Bitcoin. It's still holding strong at over 56% market share. You'd think after all these years it would be old news, but Bitcoin's never boring, is it?
Not at all. But while it might seem like business as usual with Bitcoin still king of the hill, there are some shifts happening beneath the surface that we should be paying attention to. For example, did you see that Bitcoin ETFs just surpassed gold funds and assets under management?
Wow, that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, gold has always been seen as that safe haven asset, especially when things get a little rocky. So to see investors putting more faith in Bitcoin ETFs than gold suggests a pretty significant shift in how institutional investors are thinking about digital assets.
For sure. I think it shows that confidence in Bitcoin as a store of value is growing, even among those traditional financial players. What's interesting to me is that this might not just be about Bitcoin's potential to grow, but also about some investors starting to question gold's ability to hold its value in the long term.
So is Bitcoin's crown starting to wobble? What could actually knock it off its throne?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? Bitcoin might be king, but there are definitely other contenders making some serious moves. One to watch closely is Ethereum. And I'm not even just talking about the technology itself, but the whole ecosystem that's being built on top of it. We're seeing so much innovation in DeFi, NFTs, and other areas, and that's attracting both developers and users.
Yeah, Ethereum is definitely the builder's playground these days. But you mentioned traditional finance getting involved. I saw something about Deutsche Bank building on Ethereum.
That's right. Deutsche Bank is actually building a layer 2 blockchain on Ethereum. They're using something called ZK Sync technology, which essentially helps make transactions faster and cheaper.
Okay, I'm gonna need you to break that down for me. What is layer two and what does ZK Sync actually do?
Imagine this. You're at the grocery store with a basket full of items, and there's a long line at the regular checkout. But then you notice a self-checkout lane that's just for people with only a few items. That's kind of like layer 2. It's like creating a separate, faster lane for certain types of transactions on Ethereum.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So Deutsche Bank is basically creating an express lane for their Ethereum transactions. What does that tell us about how the big players are viewing Ethereum?
It tells us they're taking it seriously, not just as a speculative asset, but as a platform for building real-world financial applications. It's becoming less about the hype and more about the practical potential. And Deutsche Bank isn't alone. We're seeing other institutions exploring Ethereum's capabilities too.
That's a big shift from just a few years ago when crypto was seen as the Wild West by many in traditional finance. Now we're talking about major banks building on it. It seems like the regulatory landscape is also starting to catch up. What are your thoughts on the latest developments there?
Yeah, regulation is a hot topic right now. In Europe, for instance, they just finalized the guidelines for implementing the MiCA regulation. It's a pretty big deal for investors in Europe because it aims to create more standardized and transparent market for crypto assets across all the EU member states.
So Mike is basically trying to bring some order to the European crypto market. Can you break down what that means for everyday investors like myself?
Well, for you, it means increased investor protection. There will be stricter rules for crypto companies operating in Europe, which should help to weed out some of the scams and bad actors out there. It also aims to create a more stable market as the regulations are designed to help prevent extreme volatility and market manipulation.
So it sounds like they're trying to walk that fine line between encouraging innovation while also protecting investors. But while Europe seems to be moving towards a more regulated environment, we're also seeing regulators cracking down in other parts of the world. What's happening with Binance in Australia?
Right. The Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, is actually suing Binance. They're alleging that Binance misclassified hundreds of retail clients as wholesale investors, potentially exposing them to higher risks than they should have been taking on.
That definitely highlights that tension that exists between the fast-paced world of crypto and the need for rules and oversight. Is more regulation ultimately a good thing or a bad thing for the crypto space?
That's a tough question. It's a complex issue. On one hand, regulation can bring much-needed legitimacy and stability to the market, which could attract more institutional investors and lead to more mainstream adoption, which is ultimately good for everyone. On the other hand, you have the concern that too much regulation could stifle innovation and push activity underground. So it's a delicate balancing act.
Speaking of interesting juxtapositions, it's not just regulations in crypto that are colliding these days. It seems like politics is also getting more entangled with the crypto world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the partnership between Athena Labs and Trump's World Liberty Financial?
Yeah, I saw that Athena Labs is actually partnering with Trump's World Liberty Financial.
Yeah.
They even bought a chunk of ENA tokens. What are your thoughts on this seemingly odd pairing?
It's definitely an interesting development. It'll be fascinating to see how this partnership plays out and what it might signal about the growing influence of political figures in the crypto space.
It's definitely a sign that crypto is no longer operating in its own little bubble. It's becoming intertwined with global events, and politics is a big part of that.
Right. And speaking of political predictions, did you see what Arthur Hayes, the former BitMEX CEO, is forecasting?
Fill me in. What's Arthur Hayes predicting?
Well, he's predicting a potential crypto sell-off triggered by Trump's inauguration in January. He argues that the return of Trump could create a lot of macroeconomic uncertainty and regulatory fears, which could spook investors and lead to a market downturn.
Wow, that's a pretty bold prediction.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any merit to his argument?
It's certainly possible Trump's policies and rhetoric could have a pretty significant impact on various markets, including crypto. His stance on regulation trade, even social media, could create volatility and uncertainty, which investors typically don't like.
It seems like we're heading into some uncharted territory with crypto becoming increasingly entangled with politics. Definitely a trend worth watching closely. Well, let's shift gears a bit and zoom in on some specific tokens making headlines, both good and bad.
From Solana's European expansion to the Pudgy Penguins' Rocky token debut, there's a lot to unpack. Let's dive in. Let's kick things off with some good news for Solana holders. They've had a bit of a roller coaster ride lately, but there are some positive developments.
Yeah, for sure. So what's happening that's got Solana folks feeling a little more optimistic?
Well, Bitwise, a pretty big player in the crypto asset management space, just launched a Solana staking ETP in Europe.
Okay, so I know ETP stands for Exchange Traded Product, but can you remind me what that means in practice for someone who might not be familiar with the term?
Sure, an ETP basically gives investors exposure to an asset, in this case Solana, without actually having to directly own the tokens themselves. Think of it like a convenient package that you can buy and sell on a traditional exchange. And the staking part is particularly interesting because it means investors can actually earn rewards just for helping to secure the Solana network.
So it's kind of like a way to potentially benefit from Solana's growth without having to deal with all the technical stuff of holding and staking tokens yourself. Sounds pretty user-friendly.
Exactly. It simplifies things. And the fact that this ETP is launching in Europe is particularly noteworthy. European regulators have traditionally been pretty cautious about crypto. So this approval from them suggests that they're starting to see some real potential in Solana. It could be a sign of broader institutional adoption to come, which is generally a good thing for long-term growth.
That's exciting news for Solana. It's a good reminder that for every high-profile project that's maybe struggling, there are others out there quietly building and gaining traction. But speaking of struggles, not every token launch goes quite as smoothly. What happened with those Pudgy Penguins? Remember those adorable NFT penguins that were all over the place a while back?
Oh yeah, I remember them. They were quite the sensation. They recently launched their own token called PNG with a ton of hype and a pretty hefty initial market cap. But the debut didn't exactly go as planned, let's just say that.
What happened? Did it flop?
Well, the token price plummeted something like 50% in just the first few hours of trading.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt. It seems like meme-driven hype can only take you so far in the crypto world. What do you think went wrong in this case?
It's a classic example of what happens when hype outpaces utility. There was a lot of initial excitement around the Pudgy Penguins brand, but the token itself didn't really seem to offer much beyond that. Investors quickly realized that a cute penguin avatar doesn't necessarily translate to a valuable token with real-world use cases.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that just because something is trendy or has a cute mascot doesn't mean it's a solid investment. You always have to look beyond the surface and understand the underlying value proposition.
Absolutely.
With all this news swirling around positive developments, regulatory challenges, scams, what's the overall market sentiment looking like right now? Is it doom and gloom, or is there a sense of optimism?
I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's definitely a sense of cautious optimism out there, fueled by milestones like the Bitcoin ETFs surpassing gold funds and Ethereum gaining traction in traditional finance. But there's also an undercurrent of uncertainty driven by those regulatory crackdowns, some macroeconomic concerns, and of course, the ever-present threat of scams.
It sounds like we're in for another wild ride on the crypto roller coaster. But that's kind of what makes it so fascinating, isn't it? What are some key takeaways you hope listeners are getting from today's deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the crypto landscape is constantly changing. Staying informed is crucial, but it's not just about reading headlines. It's about understanding the why behind the news, analyzing the potential impact of these developments, and ultimately making informed decisions based on your own risk tolerance and investment goals. It really feels like we're at this interesting point where crypto is moving beyond just a niche interest and becoming something much bigger. We've got growing institutional adoption regulation, starting to bring some clarity in traditional finance, dipping their toes in the water. But even with all that, it still feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's
It
possible.
really does feel that way. With all these pieces moving around, what are the big question marks, the things that are still up in the air about the future of crypto?
I think the biggest one is still regulation. We talked about MiCA in Europe and the crackdown in Australia, but globally, the regulatory landscape is still kind of a patchwork of different approaches. Will governments around the world embrace the potential of crypto and create frameworks that encourage responsible innovation? Or will we see more heavy-handed regulations that stifle growth and maybe even push activity underground?
Yeah, the impact of regulation is definitely a key factor to watch. What about the bigger economic picture? We've got inflation worries, rising interest rates, geopolitical tensions bubbling up all over the place. How could those things influence where crypto goes from here?
Well, crypto isn't immune to those broader economic trends.
Hmm.
If we see a prolonged recession or a major financial crisis, it's likely that crypto markets will be impacted just like any other asset class. But there's also this interesting argument that Bitcoin, with its limited supply and decentralized nature, could actually benefit from those kinds of scenarios. Some investors believe it could act as a kind of digital gold, a safe haven asset in times of economic turmoil.
A digital gold rush, if you will. But it also makes you wonder, will Bitcoin be able to hold on to its dominance, or will we see other contenders like Ethereum step up and challenge its position at the top?
That's definitely a possibility. Ethereum has a lot going for it. The robust ecosystem, the focus on innovation, the strong appeal to developers. We're also seeing the emergence of other really promising blockchain platforms and layer 2 solutions that could shake things up. It's a dynamic and competitive space, which is part of what makes it so exciting to follow.
It definitely never gets boring in the world of crypto.
Hmm.
What advice would you give to our listeners who are trying to make sense of it all, trying to navigate this constantly changing landscape?
Stay informed, stay curious, and stay cautious. Keep learning about the latest developments, but don't just blindly follow the hype. Do your research, understand the risks, and make decisions that align with your own personal financial goals and risk tolerance. It's a powerful technology with huge potential, but it's still early days.
It's like we're in the early days of the internet when everything was moving so fast and nobody knew exactly what the future held, but the possibilities seemed endless.
Exactly. It's an exciting time to be a part of the crypto world, but it's important to approach it with a balanced and informed perspective.
Well said. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from Bitcoin and Ethereum to regulations, and even the surprising connection between politics and crypto. It's been a fascinating deep dive. And as always, we want to hear from you. What are your takeaways from today's conversation? What are your predictions for the future of crypto? Share your thoughts, your hopes, your fears. Let's keep this conversation going.
There's no crystal ball, but by sharing our perspectives and continuing to learn, we can navigate this exciting new world together.
And that's a wrap on today's deep dive into the world of crypto. Stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, happy investing.